I think if we see our own self-development as a matter of creation, we end up with what I think is one of the most difficult fallacies of the contemporary world. You can be whatever you want to be. Now, that is often said to people in what I would regard as a perfectly understandable setting. People have been told that they can't be interesting, alive in certain ways. But the swing of the pendulum towards, well, who you are is up to you. I think something's on a bit askew there. There's a context in which it makes absolute sense, moral sense, and there's a context in which it's quite dangerous because it's setting people up to fail. So the discovery element is important. It's not discovering a true self buried beneath everything else, this little kind of goblin sitting in you who is your ideal self. But it's learning to feel the texture and the fabric of the world you're actually in, learning to scrutinize your own emotions and hopes with clarity and patience, learning what you've learned, looking back over your life and saying, so that's how I came to be like this. And all that's discovery. And when all that is coming clear, you begin to see, so that's the next step that makes sense. That's where a real freedom lies. Not that I've been hemmed in by all these things that have happened to me, but that I've been given resources to move forward. But to move forward, I need to know a bit more about how they work. I need to attend to all those conversations I've been part of. I suppose the answer has to be, in some sense, yes, because if any act or statement of mine were incapable of being answered or questioned, there'd be no story to tell. So whether or not it's exactly a mistake, certainly it's an imperfection. It's not there yet. What I say is something to which you can say something. When I give a lecture, you can ask a question. And it's that unfinished, ragged edge which keeps us moving. I think both in comedy and in tragedy, mistake and misperception work out. I can't remember who it was who said that comedy and tragedy are about the same kinds of thing. It just depends on where you're looking at it from. And there's a lot in that, and Shakespeare knew that better than anybody, because of course there are so many of his dramas where you're uncomfortably on the edge between those two. Comedy is often about profound misunderstanding of who you are, where you are, who somebody else is, and the absurd consequences that flow from not really knowing yourself or your world. Tragedy is about exactly the same thing, whereas comedy, with some audacity, as it were, catches the china vase that's about to hit the floor. So we can actually bring this back home again. We can get some weddings and some festivities and just, tie it up neatly. Tragedy steps back. That's a crash. But in both cases, you could say mistakes are at work on them. But at the heart of it is that sense, no, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. And a mistake is one particularly stark way of saying that. I'm tempted to say that I would maybe steer away from the word control and use the fashionable word curate. Of course, it's up to you what you put on the page. Yes, that's not the precious about this. But there is, you'll know much better than I, there is that element of almost an intent listening to what could be said there. I put it like that. So what could be said in response to that? And a moment of real invitation, something to come in which is different from saying, so he'll say that, then she'll say that, then he'll say that. So he'll say that. What could be said to that? What could be said in a way that moves you from A to B? And actually shifts the trajectory a bit. I mean, it keeps us engaged, keeps us watching. I had to go at drama from time to time myself. And one thing I found when I was trying to write that drama about Shakespeare, the young Shakespeare, was I was rather overwhelmed by how much listening I thought I was doing. Having roughly imagined a cast, and then hearing them coming into the light one by one. Yes, now that makes sense, that would work. But if she's going to say that or to talk to her, that's where she's coming from. So what's he going to think about that? I'd have to say it depends a lot what kind of mood I'm in, where I'm looking. Yes. There are moments, whereas I rather controversially suggested in a little book on tragedy I read a few years ago, moments when I think bizarrely something like Sarah Kane touches such a raw religious nerve in spite of the obscenity and the atrocity. But I think she's come quite near what matters most in all that. There are moments when I think an old chestnut like A Man for All Seasons still does its work, at least in giving us a portrait of what integrity was like. And just talking to somebody the other day who was saying that when he, a priest, when he performed baptisms, he would sometimes recall for the congregation that lovely image in A Man for All Seasons where Moore says to Roper, when a man takes an oath, it's as if he takes water in his soul in his hands like water. That's such a powerful image. Yes. And then there are moments when I think Sophocles takes a lot of improving on. Yes. And Oedipus at Colonus, and of course Antigone, again, are about the kind of integrity, the kind of human wholeness that does not depend on answering the questions that society wants you to answer. I still believe that for all its complexity, Measure for Measure remains both a deeply Christian and a deeply unfinished, untidy play. Unsettling. Deeply unsettling. But it has, of course, Measure for Measure, it has Shakespeare's greatest summary of Christian doctrine in it. Why all the souls that were forfeit once, and he who might advantage best have took found out the remedy. Fantastic lines. Yes. And yet, of course, what happens in Measure for Measure is not saving exchange, or substitutionary atonement, or real reconciliation or redemption. It's a sort of complicated, rather baroque pile of evasions and short-term solutions. Bargain. Measure for Measure. There's another wonderful Shakespearean unnecessary character, Evan Olsen. The criminal in Measure for Measure refuses to get up and be hanged because he can't be bothered. What's he doing in this play? Shakespeare is just thinking, we need a little bit of relief and tension here. That's like a completely ridiculous character. And it works. And it works like a charm. Here is this completely graceless, condemned criminal saying to the jailers, I really cannot be bothered to get up and be executed. So just come back later. And somehow that's one of the most authentic moments in Measure for Measure when everybody else is so busy making their parts.